Within NIU School of Music, and likely all music schools and conservatories, there is a seemingly niche group of students whose interests go beyond just performing music and into the realm of writing it. Every state school in Illinois with a degree in music offers an emphasis in composition alongside its relatives' music education and performance. These three form the trifecta that is the core of music programs, a fact proven by random spot checks into universities both in and outside of the US. While NIU certainly has a thriving composition program, the concept of composition runs throughout the school as a whole in several forms, including, but not limited to, arranging, songwriting, and electronic music. Each of these subcategories is specifically focused on controlling aspects of a soundscape, and each contributes to a broader culture of composition with the NIU Department of Music. The Composition Department holds a weekly seminar at 3 p.m. where they discuss all manner of things related to composition and being a composer. Activities range from dissecting music to critiquing student works, to discussing the music industry. This class is attended by both majors and secondaries, leading to a diverse background. This, in a sense, creates two unique musical traditions that exist within a single studio. These traditions can be observed in the more contemporary style of Dr. Mackey, often including traditional instrumentation, but used in unique ways, for the music brought to class ethnically, religiously, culturally, and instrumentally. These various backgrounds lead to varied works being presented, from classical orchestral masterworks to love songs, accompanied only by a guitar. Further diversifying the group is the split between the students of Dr. Mackey and Dr. Pencrot, who themselves come from different backgrounds and have very different skill sets and composition sensibilities. It can also be observed in Dr. Pencrot and his interest in the world of electronic music, a skill set passed down to some of his students that give them a new tool in their work. Two mentalities, one focused on repurposing old tools, the other embracing entirely new ones. The key word in interpreting everything heard with a seminar is aesthetic. Each student and both professors have a unique set of musical preferences. This is truly put on display when a student decides to debut a piece. The New Music Festival is an annual event that aims to showcase contemporary composers, including the works of present students. The nature of a performance within a concert or recital hall, live streamed to the world, is one of professionalism. The common background of Western classical music heavily informs the etiquette of the situation. The performers give the name and at times background information for a piece. The audience is completely silent throughout, only applauding when the piece has properly come to an end. Despite this shared background, the pieces themselves are often not constrained by the typical conventions of Western classical music. A recent example is the debut of a piece by Joe Berryback during the graduate recital of Ethan Cowburn. It is a religious piece intended as a meditation on the biblical genesis for percussion and spoken word. Sacred music is incredibly common within Western music, and so is widely understood within the Midwestern recital hall that there is an expected sense of reverence and respect that the piece is entitled to. What this tangibly amounts to is a clear spoken performer and a completely silent audience. The piece is performed as passages from Genesis with musical movements in between to represent the actions taking place on each day by God. Each verse is spoken clearly and at times in unison by Ethan and a secondary performer, which gives an ethereal quality to it. The piece ends with both performers drinking tea which has been brewing over the length of the piece. There is audible sipping, which represents the rest that follows the 7 days of creation. In moments like this, it becomes apparent that one of the essential skills for our composers is the ability to define soundscapes for themselves. Breaking away from the traditions that make up a lot of what we consider to be Western classical music, the electronic music classes provide an interesting alternative in composition. There are two levels of electronic music, and both have unique approaches to the medium. The first primarily works within traditional DAWs, but focuses on creating soundscapes. The idea is to create the feeling of a place and time by using pre-recorded audio bites. The final of the class is a performance of your work within the traditional recital hall, but in the form of pre-made music. The music of this class is supplemented with MIDI, which allows for the traditional instrumentation, but far more control. This can allow you to do things like play with intonation without having to awkwardly retune an entire piano. Being students of the School of Music, of course, means that they have a Western classical background, but in these classes, they have the ability to play with the parameters. This often means that the audience cannot use their usual preconceptions about music, and the composer has the freedom to break conventions. The parameters of Western classical music are even further pushed in the second level of electronic music. The second level is working within the specific Max 4 Live DAW. This program works in a way that is more akin to programming on a computer and has capabilities well outside of conventional music production or even typical digital musical production. Last year's final performance included using the software to modify a guitar's timbre live, control pitch using only colored paper, and composing full pieces of music with only a deck of tarot cards. Performances included sound changing the lighting of the room and Beyblade toys adjusting the music content. In this way, the individual background of each composer is highly relevant to the art. The setting of traditional performance venues creates expectations that the composers actively seek to defy. From the very first piece, the feeling of the performance becomes substantially more free and lighthearted, culminating in the audience themselves being used as volunteers. The ability to utilize full sound systems and specialty lighting also allows for a deeper immersive experience than is typically possible. The culture of electronic music is deliberate inconsistency that generally wouldn't be accepted within conventional composition standards. It is in this freedom from constraints that NIU gains depth to its composition culture, no longer stuck in traditional soundscapes. The following video is excerpts from the electronic music concert in which a max patch is used to read tarot cards and, depending on the card pulled and in what order, would pull a pre-composed sound bank. Acting was used to enhance the experience.
Carry through into our world. But I'm going to need a volunteer. Anyone that's dark. Just any card you want. Excellent choice. The High Priestess. All right, Dei. Now, just a little bit of the name.
Here we can visually see the inner mechanics of a max patch, an almost circuit-like appearance that was built from scratch by a student to play music as an entirely digital instrument that they designed. A group of students that are often found across all areas of the music department is the Recording Arts Studio. Many students in this studio are not purely studying audio engineering, which means they have an incredibly diverse range of backgrounds. As its name suggests, the Recording Arts Studio probably works within incredibly controlled spaces that gives them a lot of flexibility. The recording rooms that have sound dampening essentially kills reverb and minimizes any room tones. This notably allows for pure captures of any performance within these spaces, something that will be relevant in the production classes. During an interview with Professor Carrie Chandler, she made note of the fact that in the professional world, engineers work with composers to try and capture the elements of a performance that are impossible to write into sheet music. This can include things such as manipulating microphone placement and post-production editing to create the auditory simulation of different venues. Many students not only learn to manipulate a soundscape, but how to flexibly work within different venues and the unique soundscape that comes with them. This can manifest in the form of students overlapping with the School of Theater, which has several classes specifically regarding lighting and sound within a theater. Further adding to this diversity is the 4 unique theaters within the School of Theater and Dance. An interesting but relevant crossover is the media studies side of the communications department. Many students in recording arts find themselves in these classes due to their broader focus on audio as a whole, as well as the ability to use other equipment such as the ISO booth that is not available within the School of Music. An ISO booth is a small booth that is intended to be completely dead into external noises and allow for no reflections. Aside from the venue, recording arts students have a unique way of creating music. Monday nights, Carrie Chandler runs a class simply called Recording Techniques. The focus of this class is just the art of capturing music using technology. What is interesting about the class is that recording is not a method, but an art. Different recording techniques are deliberately employed to create a different sound and even timbre in the same way that the performer might use dynamics, tonguing technique, or bowing to change the sound of a performance. Students are often given assignments that give general rules, but how exactly they are done and what they add is entirely up to them. Tuesdays and Thursdays feature a class in mixing techniques, which emphasizes the alteration of past performances in ways that can completely change the performance. Students can learn to change the timing, pitch, articulation, and timbre of a performance. A lot of this may draw a closer comparison to a performer than a composer, but in the same way that an arranger takes a pre-existing work and alters it into something distinctly different, students of the recording studio manipulate the soundscape and, at times, the performance itself to create a distinctly different performance from the one that actually occurred. The following are a few highlights from my interview with Dr. Chandler emphasizing these points.
Having to make those choices of, what mics, what preamps, what things do we use, it requires you to know what is the capability of the gear that you have. That isn't what everybody else is doing. And there are instances like that as well, where composers are like, I want to stand out from what everybody else is doing. Every single student who wants to get into recording arts or takes a recording arts class is because they have identified that there's this missing link. Like, okay, yes, I can come up with a song, I can write the song, I can create lyrics, or I can put a band together, but somehow it just doesn't sound finished.
A class that's sure to be familiar to music education students is arranging. There are several arrangement classes with different emphases, but through a candid conversation with a student of choral arranging, I learned the curriculum and how assignments are approached from the student perspective. I was shown an extensive 4-part arrangement of a prog rock song, transferred from its more traditional instrumentation to vocals and piano. The genre of music does not matter in this class because it can all be arranged with proper education. Arrangement is an essential tool of any composer and what many professionals find themselves doing as commissions. Counter to the recording arts department and its focus on manipulating the venue aspect of a soundscape, arrangers are manipulating the context of a piece of music. Where electronic music will often remove Western classical preconceptions, arrangement classes add it to places that didn't originally have it. The Composition Club is a group that meets once a week to compose music and analyze composition. This allows for a more peer-oriented version of the traditional composition lessons where your work is reviewed by a professor. The meetings happen within the library, which tends to lean toward a much more casual approach compared to the official composition seminar. While there is a structured hierarchy for the sake of funding and organization, it is not necessarily relevant to the meetings themselves. Composers are free to demonstrate their work, receive critique, and even practice composing in completely pressure-free environments. This allows for freer composition due to the lack of fear or pressure coming from grades and professors. The Composition Club loves placing parameters on their own work as a form of self-imposed challenge. Nowhere is this more visible than the Hasty Measures concert. The night before the performance, the club begins writing quickly, trying to push something out in a tight deadline. The music will then be rehearsed and performed for a live audience in a demonstration of skill on both the performer and composer's end. The culture of composition within the NIU School of Music is one of pushing boundaries and knowingly manipulating soundscapes. While there is a formal composition department that forms the backbone of that culture, there are many other areas that branch off and form their own subcultures, which in turn contribute to the diversity of the broader culture. Composition students are few in number and often not directly identified due to their classes splitting them up based on their primary instrument. Despite this, composition is incredibly prevalent, and while the majors are few, students practicing composition are abundant. Through their manipulation of venues, pretense, and context, each subculture defines itself and creates a niche for musicians of all varieties. A special thank you to Carrie Chandler, Mark Snyder, Boone Elledge, and many others who helped in the creation of this project.